I'm Kim Newton, and I'm a professor here at Bristol Community College, and I am the coordinator of the Sustainable Agriculture Program as well as the Honors Program. STEM is, science, technology, engineering, math, and STEAM has that art infused into it. And there are a lot of programs here at the college that actually already do incorporate that art. So for instance, during STEM week, even though it was called STEM, one of the speakers that they had come to the college actually was using computer programming to create generative art. And it was really much focused on the art and the artistic process, but using scientific methods to arrive at that. So, I think in a lot of cases, maybe like in terms of majors and areas and divisions and such, to be able to have various programs with DESE, so the Department of Education, that they need to be focused, like this is our science department, this is our engineering, these are our science programs. But when it comes to programming across the college, I think it is important to have the arts infused into that, and vice versa. And I think we do that too with a lot of the programs that they can put on. When it comes to budget cuts, and I live in a town where I think 75% of our tax base goes at least to the school system, and a lot of the school systems around us had to make some serious budget cuts this year. And I was sad to see some of the more vulnerable population, like special education, like some of those programs got cut, and we're working with trying to get that stuff reinstated. But yeah, art, music, a lot of those types of positions will often get, not always, but will often get cut, or be some of the first to get cut. And I think though or I hope that the realization is that those programs are especially important for many students, because that's where their talents, their interests, their passion lies, and we need to have inclusive education for folks. I also wanted to speak to, because I know you're probably going to get to this too, but the fact that science, even when it's called STEM, always has artistic components of it. So we talk about experiments, that are elegant, that are designed well, or that have really a creative process that the scientist goes through to put those together, to kind of rule out various, variables and such. But that's a very creative, almost artistic process to it. Not even to mention all of the the art that goes along with different publications, with the writing. I actually used one of my master's degrees is in professional writing, and I did science writing. So I was writing about science for the lay audience, so trying to make the material accessible, accurate, and also entertaining. So I think there's a lot of crossover between the scientific mind and the artistic mind. And I don't know if folks did get to go to that, at the presentation I mentioned that during STEM week, that Dan Giles came from Merrimack College and presented about his work with computer-generated art. And what was kind of neat was that the artists in the room were saying, and he also admitted that some of the work looked like, some like George O'Keeffe, or there was another, the name escaped me, but it was various patterns that kind of evoked other artists. So even artists use algorithms without realizing it, how the brain kind of works in generating various patterns and such. So there's a lot of crossover, I think, in between the artistic and the scientific mind, and there's value in including both. So multidisciplinary approaches, I think, are really important in the classroom and outside of it. Yeah, they definitely inform one another. I think, like I said, that creative process that folks go through in the arts very much can be applied with the sciences, and like I said, in designing experiments and such. Can I talk about the project that we do in class? So in my Science of Care of Plants class here, one of the big projects that we do is actually designing a native pollinator garden. And we start out, kind of sciencey, and we're looking at plants being suited to particular habitats and making sure that you're siting plants properly. Also looking at natives versus non-native plants and incorporating those for pollinators. Then we pull in data from Beecology about how bumblebees are using various plants in the area and choosing those. So we're using a lot of scientific data to make selections for plants. But then we lay them out in a design that's going to incorporate some scientific principles about how insects use the area, but also is kind of pleasing to the eye. So some of the design concepts that if you take a landscape architecture class kind of thing, you learn about mass, diversity, connectivity, those kinds of things when you're doing planting. So you wouldn't just want to have one little plant over here and then a bunch of mulch and then one little plant over here, and you want to have a lot of stuff together. That's good. The colors are going to play off of one another, and have that connectivity between the design, the colors, the heights of the different plants, kind of making sense, and that's going to be pleasing to the eye from an artistic sense, in terms of color and height and layout of all of that. But all of those principles also come into good design for pollinators. So when you have insects that are feeding on various plants, you don't want them traveling from this one lone plant all the way across like 500 yards away to the next example of that flowering plant. So you want to mass those together so that the bees can get the most bang for their buck in the area and get and feed a lot in one particular area. You want that mass connected to other plants in the area, connected to maybe the edge of a woodland for bumblebee, homes and places where they can their habitats, and you want connected to water sources, things like that. And then you want diversity, so you can bring in different pollinators to the area as well. So in that case, the scientific principles align with the design principles, and so we use those to come up with a design, and then students can play with it to get something that's artistically going to be pleasing, that they're actually going to want to plant or install somewhere. I think the multidisciplinary approach is really good. I don't think art is ever going to completely disappear. I don't think it can. I think it's too big of a part of us, that it's always going to be a part of us, and for that reason I think should stay in schools. Whether or not it gets the attention it deserves or the funding, the resources that it deserves is another issue. But I think having that crossover is important, having that incorporated more in schools. For instance, like the crossover that we see between English language arts and science. So rather than reading, fiction books in classes, maybe you can be reading more sort of nonfiction books about science. So you're learning about an area of science, but also getting the language arts and comprehension and things like that. So I think that kind of crossover, we're seeing a lot more of that in schools, when you get that collaboration between different teachers. That's more in the upper grades too, when the kids are actually going to different teachers. But you also get that in classes where one teacher's teaching multi-subjects. So science isn't actually taught at very early grades either in a lot of schools. But I think some of the concepts of that could be introduced earlier, just like the art is. And so yeah, I think getting that crossover is a good way to make sure that it's ingrained in the curriculum. All right, take science and care of plants. And if you want to, I'm just going to put a promo in for our program. Sustainable agriculture program isn't just for folks who want to become farmers. It's for people who are interested in growing more on their land, or you may be a hobby farmer, or you may just be interested in learning more about plants and gardening. In our specialized crops class, we have students that are doing independent projects based on dreams that they might have about maybe making and selling various products from the farm, or selling flowers and things like that. So we work with the students individually on what they want to accomplish. So it's not necessarily just for people who want to own their own big farm. If you're just interested in plants in general, we have a lot of great classes in the program: permaculture, the science and care of plants class, sustainable agriculture, and entomology class. And plant disease, if you're interested in learning a bit more about insects that you might find in your garden. So check it out.